Please be seated. Yesterday, a simple invitation opened a new way of thinking and seeing for me. My son, his voice stretched a little thin by a long school break, and the quiet ache of wanting relationship, presumably with his friends, but as a stand-in, I do, asked almost offhandedly, "Do you want to do something, like play a board game?" "Of course," I said, with that fatherly enthusiasm that knows moments like these are all too fleeting, soon to be folded into that long-forgotten chapter entitled childhood. Especially now that this second child of mine is getting ready to leave the nest. Have you ever noticed how small invitations, so ordinary they might pass unnoticed completely, can open a doorway into something new and unexpected? We pulled the board pieces from the Stratego box out, and I felt wrapped up in endings, unsure of where to begin. I stared at the empty board, wide with possibilities. Kieran quickly arrayed his pieces with certainty. "Hurry up, Dad. Put your pieces on the board." As I placed my pieces somewhat haphazardly, I realized something. The board, though it suggested a battlefield, offered no real topography, except for two small little lakes at the center of the board, which must be navigated around and not through. The board was entirely flat. No hills, no valleys, no obstacles to slow an ascent or hasten a descent. As I placed my vulnerable flag furthest away from Kieran as possible, it struck me. When we think about life, our future, our past, we flatten it out too. We smooth out the contours. We forget the steep climbs and the sudden drops. We make it tidy, navigable, simpler than it ever was. We remember the past as simpler than it felt, and we imagine a future as clearer than it will be. We completely erase the terrain. I wonder if you've ever caught yourself doing this, maybe thinking about a moment in life and going, "Oh, those were the good old days," until you really stopped and thought about it and thought, "Those were really rough days. I was hungry, I didn't have enough. No one was around me, no one cared. But these were the good old days. Oh, and it'll be better in the future too, right?" How often do you flatten your life, your own history, your own expectations? Sometimes aging teaches us to pause and notice life. Notice life in the midst of all its textured topography, in the present moment. Real life is uneven. It has ridges and ravines, unexpected turns, moments that trip us up, and moments that lift us up higher than we ever imagined. Stratego may give us a flat board, but life never does. That afternoon invitation, said with a child's boredom, landed like a deep, divine summons. A new strategy, a new way of seeing life, an unexpected doorway to walk through. It reminded me of one of T.S. Eliot's famous poems, where he observed, "Beginnings are often hidden inside of endings. Every ending quietly makes room for a new beginning. The end is always where we start from." So different and yet so familiar, all at the same time. What endings in your life are soon to become quiet beginnings? When have you returned to the familiar and found it utterly new and changed? What I assumed was an ending, another long afternoon sliding towards dusk, became a beginning yesterday. And what began then also ended something else. That quiet belief that I had to orchestrate meaning, that connection required grand gestures, and a few dad jokes along the way. When all that's required is the simple assent of presence. Just showing up, paying attention. Today we start a new liturgical year. With its topsy-turvy beginning at the end, Advent upends our expectations, always encountering the familiar as something new. Yes, Advent invites us to see our pilgrimage through this life as cyclical, spiraling, returning. Not always a straight line, not always a climb. I wonder, where is God calling you to notice the small, ordinary path with all of its textures this Advent? What is your life saying to you? What is God beginning in you? Pilgrimage sometimes begins in the living room. It begins with saying yes to a small invitation. It begins with allowing ourselves to be interrupted. And it begins with letting another's desire, however casually expressed, turn our steps. In a way, Advent is a pilgrimage into the unknown. As Jesus says in today's Gospel of Matthew, "But about that day and that hour, no one knows. You must also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an unexpected hour." Tends to make us a little anxious, I think. We hear it in terms that are maybe dark. But what if it was an invitation to begin life again in a new way instead of something that was about the ending? We don't know when or how or what's next in life. We never do. That's part of what it means to be a pilgrim. And we don't know whether to call it a beginning or an end. What we know is that God is with us. And while it may seem that we're waiting in vain in the midst of so many great unknowns, Advent also gives us time to remember what we already know. The one who is coming is the one who has always been with us, the truly human one. In Jesus, God knows how it feels to be time-bound, vulnerable, fully present, and yet also pulled in so many directions. To have kind of a split self. Endings and beginnings are just like that. They're rarely clean. They're always concomitant and implicated and imbricated. They loop into one another. Every arrival is another departure. Every ending is a beginning in disguise. We end one way of seeing, and a new vision emerges. We lay down an old assumption, and a new tenderness rises up. We close one chapter, the busy, distracted self, and open the next, where even a child's bored question becomes a doorway into grace. The prophet Isaiah opens the first Sunday of Advent with a vision of hope, a beginning end and an ending beginning, when nations flock to God's holy mountain and instruments of war are transformed into tools that nourish life instead. Set against the Assyrian conquests, Israel's division into two kingdoms, and Jerusalem's narrow escape from destruction, I think these verses are not just time-bound, but relevant and powerful today as well. With so much division in our world, as always borne the most heavily by the poor, the marginalized, and disenfranchised, we are invited to consider, what weapons do we carry? Words, fears, habits that could instead be transformed into tools of care and sustenance? In what ways do we use language that creates an us and a them? Isaiah invites his audience to imagine a world where enemies return not with violence, but with humility and a desire to learn, emphasizing that wisdom and peace can triumph over conflict and violence. Maybe that is the beginning that is just now beginning to emerge. What if we looked at the board of life differently? Not as a flat landscape suited to our aims, but as an opportunity to connect with our opponent. even the child, the neighbor, stranger on the other side. Because it's always a family member, if we believe that we are one human family. Advent provides us space to look this reality in the face, that things are complicated, mixed up. For Advent is nothing but complex emotions. Fear, grief, joy intertwined with hope. It is a bittersweet season of fresh opportunity that's created through loss and ending. Just as the temple once stood and symbolized God's tangible presence, these verses remind us that even in the moments of despair, personal, local, or global, hope remains possible. Hope exists. It's the word of the day. Our one banner there says hope. We created these banners back in 2020 when it was hard to get into church, and we invited people to write down things that brought them hope. Take a look at the end of the service. You can see from 5 years ago where we thought hope might exist in the midst of a global pandemic. Hope is always there for us. Like pilgrims. Oh, sorry, I skipped a paragraph. Where is your life? Where could your life be turned away from a weapon into a tool of care? Where could humility replace conflict? Patience replace judgment? Maybe listening replace arguing? Every step, every small assent to presence, every word spoken in care, every act of generosity begins the movement of something new, a movement of the people to make hope lived, felt, incarnated. Like pilgrims circling back to where they began, we arrive at familiar places and discover everything anew. The thing that stuck us, the thing that wound us up, that relationship, that context, that person can be made new again when we come with new eyes and a new vision. Advent gives us with this truth. Even in the uneven ground of our lives, even amid fear, grief, and uncertainty, hope walks with us. And we arrive at what we thought was the beginning or the end, we might see it for the first time. And the game continues. And yet as I stand here, I can still see that Stratego board in front of me. The pieces, the empty spaces, the two little lakes in the center, so ordinary, so flat, yet so full of possibility. I remember my son leaning forward, eager for the game to begin, and I see now the board was never really about winning or losing. It was about presence. It was about attention. It was about sharing a space where imagination, strategy, care can form relationship. What would life be like if we walked through our days that way? If we treated our own flat boards, the routines and obligations, the small interruptions, with the same attention, curiosity, and willingness to play, to have fun, to be there for the first time. In Advent, we are reminded that the path to God is not always a grand ascent. Sometimes it's the quiet ascent to presence, the small yes that opens the way. The game begins in the living room. The pilgrimage begins with the smallest invitation. So I return my mind to that board, with my flag nestled carefully in its corner, soldiers and bombs arranged with whatever wisdom I could muster, my son watching eagerly across the board. Every move mattered, not just for the outcome, but for the relationship, the attention, for that shared moment. And Advent whispers the same thing to us. Every choice, every act of presence, every willingness to notice the ordinary becomes holy. Every ending, every game piece captured, every strategy revealed is also a beginning. Every moment of attention can open a new doorway. So today, as we begin this preparational period for Christ's coming again, When the nativity scene, it'll be there in 24 short days. It's an opportunity to remember, to look at our own board differently. Where is your vulnerable flag in your life? Where are your small acts of care, your attentiveness, your presence? And how might this Advent be a time you can play the game differently? Not to conquer, not even to win, but to connect, to be present, to notice, to receive grace in the ordinary. The board is flat, but life is never flat. And yet on that board and in that ordinary room, God meets us. And the game begins, and we can start again. Let's play. Amen. Standing in body or in